And now for this drop-up question, we have another trinomial, but where a is greater than 1. So here's the example problem. 2x squared minus 15x plus 25. And now the first thing, remember, is to check to see if we have a GCF, a greatest common factor. So is there something that these factors have in common? And they don't. We have a 2, a 15, a 25. They don't have anything in common that they can break down. So we can go ahead and start factoring. Unfortunately, don't start getting ahead of ourselves and try to group this up, because this has an a greater than 1. And keep in mind that this is going back to this form, ax squared plus bx plus c, known as a quadratic. So our a here is the 2. When it's greater than 1, we can't just put x and x, because x times x will give us x squared, but we need a 2. So that means that one of these is going to have to end up being a 2, but then how are we going to figure out the other two numbers? And it's a little bit of a process, but it's not too bad. And how I'm going to show you guys on how to do it is going to be called the AC method. So I'm just going to erase that a little bit there. So AC method, just as it's written, is multiplying your A and your C. Remember that A and C are our numbers. So A is the 2 here. If I label this, A is 2, B is 15, and C is 25. So if I multiply my A and my C, 2 times 25, that gives us 50. And make sure to keep the signs the same. So this is a positive 2 and this is a positive 25. Positive 2 times positive 25 will give us 50. So now, instead of looking for, normally I would find, what two numbers multiply to 25 and add to negative 15, using AC method tells me that the AC is my new number that I'm going to multiply to. So I'm not finding factors that multiply to 25. I'm now finding factors that multiply to 50. So, and this time add to negative 15. So that stays the same, but the last term, A times C, give us our new number to multiply. So what two factors multiply to 50 and add up to negative 15? Well, 1 times 50 gives me 50. 2 times 25. But remember, when I'm going down this list, I want to make sure I get to negative 15. And if you're unsure, you can always use your calculator and check. If I try dividing by 3, it gives me a decimal. I don't want to write decimals. I want to just keep in mind that these need to be whole numbers. So I can keep going down the list. Divided by 4 gives me a decimal. Divided by 5 would give me 10. And so on and so forth. And so when I get here, I have 5 and 10. So that could be something I want to try. And if I have if I actually assign a negative to both, negative 5 and negative 10, multiplied together, they give me positive 50, and that's what I need. Positive 2 times positive 25 gives me positive 50. But when I add them together, they need to be negative 15. That's why I'm assigning negatives to both of these. Okay? So now what I'm going to do, AC method, all it is replacing this middle term. I'm going to copy down my first term exactly the way it is and my last term, plus 25. But now this middle term is going to change to be the two factors, negative 5x, negative 10x. And it will adopt, these two factors will adopt all of the variables of the middle term. So because the variable is just an x, that means that I need to assign an x to the negative 5 and an x to the negative 10. So that's how we get here. So hopefully you guys are following along. Just make sure, if you're not sure if you're doing this right or wrong, you can always combine like terms and get back to the original. So 2x squared, if I combined negative 5 and negative 10, it should give me back to negative 15. So really, I didn't change this problem at all. Doing this piece right here just tells me how to break up this middle term. Okay? After we do that, it's pretty simple. Now that I have 4 terms instead of 3 terms, AC is always breaking 3 terms into 4 terms because it's easier to factor 4 terms than 3 terms. And I'll show you how. We're going to break this in half, but just be careful about where you draw your line. You see how I drew my line here? You don't want to draw it here because I'm breaking apart this 10 and the negative. You want to keep the signs to their numbers. So if it's a negative 10, keep the negative with the 10. Okay? So I'm going to just make that a more definitive line here. And I'm going to factor this group, and then I'm going to factor this group. So we're going to factor these separately. So if I'm looking at this first group here, 2x squared minus 5x, what do they have in common? We look at the coefficients, 2 and 5. They don't have anything in common other than 1. So now I'm going to look at the variables, x squared and x. They have an x in common, so that means I can factor out an x. When I factor out an x, remember anything left over is in parentheses, and I have 2x, right? Because x times 2x gives me 2x squared. And then minus 5, because negative 5 times x gives me negative 5x. Now over here, negative 10x plus 25, something you should always know is whenever you have a negative in the front, always factor it out. You can almost bring it down, and that will always be what we factor out first, the negative. And then we're looking at 10x and 25. Let's look at the coefficients, 10 and 25. 10 and 25 have 5 in common. So we can factor out a 5, 10x, but 25 has no x, so we can't take out an x. The only thing we can take out is a 5. And now whatever's left over, negative 5 times 2x will give us negative 10x. And then negative 5 times a positive 5 will give us, negative 5 will give us a positive 25 again. That's the only thing a little bit tricky about factoring out the negative. You always want to double check. Negative 5 times 2x will give us negative 10x. Negative 5 times negative 5 should give us positive 25. So be careful when you're factoring out a negative to double check your signs and make sure that it should give you back to what you had up here. Okay? And so in a way, similarly also, because this negative dropped down here, you almost want to think this was a positive and we dropped that down here. And so that was a positive x, but it's mainly important when it's a negative because that will affect your signs. So moving on, if you're able to follow along that far, good job. And now to check was one last step until we get to the final answer. And to know you have this right so far, you want to check what's inside the parentheses of this group. We have 2x minus 5, but we also have a 2x minus 5 here. So factoring, all that factoring means taking out what you have in common. Believe it or not, this line has a group in common, and it has this group in common, which means we can factor that group out. When you're factoring out a group, you take the whole group out, so 2x minus 5, and whatever's left over is what's being multiplied in the front. So it's a positive x and a negative 5. Minus 5. And this will be our final answer. If you didn't have this group correct, that means that something happened from here, from this line to this line, where your factors could have been wrong. Maybe you might have factored it out incorrectly, or you missed a sign, but these two groups have to be exactly the same. 2x minus 5 and 2x minus 5. If it was 2x minus 5, 2x plus 5, you wouldn't be able to factor out the 2x minus 5. They have to be mirror matching exactly the same before you can factor it out here to get your final answer.